it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Let's go around again, Sam. Oh, wow. It sounds very... I just love that new intro. Hello, everyone. So FPL preseason ticks into August, nearing fever pitch as we hustle towards game week 1 at seemingly breakneck speed. I can't believe that the Community Shield's this weekend. I can't believe the season kicks off next Friday, Sam. It felt like at one point we were staring down the barrel of one hell of a summer, but it feels like it's really crept up really quickly. The Euros seem to have gone by in a flash. Here we are. I'm Tom, and this is the third of our preseason offerings. This week, bringing a new twist to proceedings to help you prepare for the maelstrom which is to come. I'm joined as always by Sam, with our heads just about back on the level after a spinningly brilliant pod last week with Simon Analytic FPL. Really, really good. If you didn't catch that one, do go back and check it out. Probably one of the most fun pods we've done for a little while. And begin to ready our descent down the home straight, don't we? Using Olympics reference, still going on. You're all right, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Yeah, perfectly summarised on last week's pod. Really, really top notch. Enjoyed having Simon on, learnt a lot, and been doing a lot of research in the background since then as well. And of course, Olympics has been fun to be keeping track of over the last couple of days too, or last couple of weeks rather. So yeah, good couple of weeks, but it feels like FPL is now right round the corner. We're in August, so it does feel like it's creeping up very quickly. Less than 2 weeks to go, so we need to start getting our drafts locked in a little bit and getting our planning properly sorted. So hopefully today will be illuminating and help us both, as well as you, if you're listening in. As always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we are going to start off with a bit of a general discussion on how things are developing, players who are becoming more interesting to us and the wider community, and our thoughts on those players. A very swift draft update. Where are we in our current plans and tinkering at the moment? And of course, the highlight of today's pod will be basically we've put our minds together and thought up 10 of the mistakes that hopefully we won't be repeating or making again this season in Fantasy Premier League, which of course, hopefully will help you too. I'm sure we'll end up failing on one or two of them, but I'll probably come back to this pod and use it as a reminder as we go through the duration of the season. It is Monday, the 5th of August, 11 days, or most likely 10 when you're listening to this, if you listen back on Tuesday morning, until the Premier League kicks off. Yikes. Tom, with that, shall we get going?
Yeah, let's. So obviously at this time of year, there's the usual kind of pre-season bandwagons which are going off. Quite a lot, obviously, going on in the background. Transfer windows now open, and now the Euros are out of the way. I mean, obviously, there's some stuff going on in the Olympics. Some players are way there, but nonetheless, certain players have been caught up in the transfer net, I guess, even despite representing their countries. England players back on Monday, Sam. Obviously, there are a few questions floating around. I've been asked a few times, do we think England players are going to be starting game week 1? That's something that I've seen quite a lot being asked around. And I don't know, Sam, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's player dependent, really. I mean, the obvious case study that comes to mind is Saka versus a Foden. We know Pep is very hesitant to bring a player like Foden back in if he's not had a proper pre-season. We heard from him directly that he's likely going to have an extended break and be kind of brought back in slowly. So he might be a doubt for game week 1. Saka at the very other end of the scale, you'd expect, because he's so important to the way Arsenal play, and because Arteta, quite frankly, just plays him no matter what. He could have a broken leg and he'd probably still start right wing. So you kind of feel that it is player dependent. There will be other cases kind of murky in the middle. I'm getting a little bit more nervous on Trent, for example, where he's only gotten back, I think, the last couple of days, and Bradley's been obviously a pretty good deputy at right back at times last season. So will he be rushed straight back in, especially against a promoted side in game week 1? It's hard to tell, but you'd probably err on the side of he's a quality player. He probably will start. So yeah, we've got plenty to consider there. I think it is player dependent, but the managers who tend to like a bit of rotation, have deeper squads, will most likely be the ones that we need to worry most about. So Pep, we're looking at you.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the manager, and I guess the replaceability of the player. Speaking to your point about deeper squads, I think that kind of is the key to all of these players. It's a case by case basis, and hopefully the press conferences. It's been a while since we've had a press conference to listen to, but hopefully those pre-game press conferences do elicit a bit of information. Just because you do tend to have the FPL relevant players being called up as called out as will this player be playing? I know Arteta's already said that he expects Saka fit for game week 1. So I think that's going to be kind of all okay. So yeah, I'll see how it goes effectively. I'd be kind of less keen on a Foden. Don't know about Trent, as you said. Bradley's been doing very well, so probably want to just kind of see what happens with Arne Slot's first press conference as well. A couple of other kind of trends I've sort of noticed out there. And I kind of predicted this a few weeks back, but there was a fairly noticeable flirtation with going no Haaland, that appears to have evaporated. I think pretty much every squad that I've seen has been kind of Haaland back due to. Pep did say he had a few niggles, and then off he goes and scores a hat-trick in pre-season against Chelsea, who were not kind of a weak Chelsea team by any stretch, actually. So I think that's one that I've seen quite a lot of. And Salah as well, like having them both in one draft, I'm seeing that a lot more now than I was at the very beginning, when people were kind of thinking, oh, no, it's amazing what you can do with all this money, the depth and breadth that you can get away with. I don't know, Sam, it just feels to me like people are sort of, the proximity to game week 1 is making things feel a lot more real than people are thinking, oh crap, if I don't start with these guys and say, Haaland gets a couple of goals against Chelsea, what am I going to be doing? So I might as well start with him, especially if Foden may not be playing game week 1. Salah got a good start, and he's the only one that you can really rely on at Liverpool at the moment, because we don't really know. A big unknown is who's going to step forward, be it a Darwin, be it a Jota, be it a Szoboszlai, whatever. So I don't know, it feels like things are kind of, I guess, becoming more anchored in reality, perhaps, as we get closer to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of safety more than anything else. It depends how brave you want to be at the start of the season. Both of those players, Salah and Haaland, are the very top of their price points, and Haaland obviously by a very considerable margin up front. 6 million drop off down to Watkins is the nearest, and that has a strategic element to it as well. Do you want to go without Haaland in game week 1 against a side that, by the way, he's just scored a hat-trick against in pre-season? That is meant to be the tougher fixture of the first two. And then in game week 2, if he did get even a goal against Chelsea, you're probably a bit panicking ahead of Ipswich at home for their first home clash of the season. So that 6 million drop off means that there's really no way you could get to him without a pretty drastic restructuring in game week 2 if you went without him. And I think that fear is just starting to creep in a little bit now, where the reality sets in and it's like, well, 6 million, the difference, there's plenty I can do elsewhere, but a lot of those upgrades, let's say in midfield especially, are slight risks for game week 1. So your Sakas, your Fodens, your Palmers, even potentially not going to be quite up to speed yet. And I think if they'd all had a full pre-season, it'd be a bit easier to go against Haaland and back maybe 2 or 3 of the 10 millions. But considering Haaland's had a full pre-season, come back fresh, and the others that you probably take him on with we just don't know what they're going to look like at the moment, because a lot of them haven't even started playing pre-season friendlies yet. It does make it quite challenging to go without. And again, the very similar argument for Salah. So yeah, especially with Liverpool's first 5 fixtures, it's quite tough to go without, I think.
It is. I mean, I did look at, for example, and we'll talk about it in a little bit with drafts. Like I did look at a Trent draft, which I sent you actually the other day. But the issues that you've already kind of detailed with Trent just make you think of it's a flight to safety, as you've kind of said already. it does kind of feel like all sort of the wacky out there sort of things that we were seeing a lot more of, having a whole defense of 4.5 million defenders and just kind of marveling at the fact that you've got this killer front eight. All of those things seem to be kind of receding a little bit. A couple of players. I did note that Mark Gahey to Newcastle is seemingly lurching closer. Yeah, so that could be something which could impact both. Obviously, him being pickable, and also maybe the Palace defense. Although, that's one to keep an eye on. So maybe if let's not go into that one in case it doesn't happen. Pedro Porro seems to be appearing in a lot more squads now. Obviously, a very good first couple of games for Spurs. So if you do want to just put the afterburners on immediately, he could be one to go with. Obviously, last year's defensive record does still trouble me on that. Porro did perform obviously pretty well last year, and I enjoyed owning him for vast tranches of it. I still can't quite get there with Porro at the moment. I still kind of much prefer Guardiola, who's rejoined the City squad, I believe. I think he rejoined them last week. So I mean that fared well. I think there was a really nice assist that I saw a few days ago. So he'd probably be the one that I'd be really going with if I was just doing one premium, which is kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to Porro, I think the problem is the players either side of him in the price points. I think he's the only pickable or relevant 5.5, I would say. But 6, you've got Gvardiol, you've got the Arsenal defenders on the whole as well, and Van Dijk and Robertson as well. Let's not forget. And then on the 5s, you've got Munoz as well, who I think, whilst the data isn't quite as good as Porro's, from an attacking point of view, the defensive data actually betters Spurs by quite a long way. And they've got, I would say, better fixtures defensively, at least for the first 5 game weeks than Spurs do. So for 0.5 less in a slightly better defense, okay, obviously that's Gahey dependent, possibly, but is it really worth that extra 0.5 for a very slight additional goal threat? It could pay off. But those 0.5s are pretty precious at the start of the season, and I feel like I'd prefer a bit more security there.
I think it's one for me to come back to, game week 5. I mean, you mentioned there's a wildcard window around then, and probably, I think they've got Man City in, I think, game week 12, but around then as well is another wildcard window, especially because that's when Arsenal, I listened to Adam Pritchard, a friend of the pod on Planet FPL Correspondent Week this morning. I was on my run, and that was kind of the time that I think if you are going for Arsenal, that's when you go for it, because all of the difficult fixtures are not all out the way, but a lot of the difficult away games, especially, which everyone seems to know about, they're all gone, and that's kind of a good time to get in then. So I think that'd be the time you'd be looking at a Porro, but I can't quite get there at the moment. And finally, the bobsleigh. Oscar Bob in a lot of thoughts at the moment, and this FPL in particular, who was obviously very knowledgeable about these things, kind of saying that Luke was saying, he can kind of cover in all sorts of positions, and in terms of the start of the season could well be the starting sort of right wing pick as it is. Alvarez, just now they've said that it's getting very close to a here we go effectively to go to Atleti. Don't know that at the moment, but I've listened to this, that could be completely off. We simply don't know. But I mean, at 5.0 again, potentially one that a lot of people are looking at, and it's one I'm in two minds about, Sam. It could be absolutely ginormous and amazing, and could be this year's Cole Palmer, I've seen him described as. On the other hand, he could well be one of those players that you kind of think, oh, God, remember him? Remember when we all had that guy? As he falls out of the team by game week 3, and Pep decides, that he really fancies Doku, or Savio comes in instead. So it's one of those that I'm a little bit skeptical of. If we do get intel that he's looking like he could play the first couple of games, I don't know, it's Pep, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just a little bit too risky. Yeah, he could be the next Foden, Palmer, and maybe one day he will be, but it's important to remember that both of those players came through at City. One of them took years to become a consistent starter, and that was Phil Foden. And the other one didn't ever become a consistent starter and had to move to Chelsea to get those minutes. So yes, he looks quite likely to get a game or two at the start of the season at the moment. And obviously at 5 million, that's great. But once the squad are back, once players are back fully fit, he's going to be a minutes risk. And at 5 million, you're kind of stuck for other options. If he gets a price drop down to 4.9, there's not much else you can do barring finding an extra 0.5 or 0.6 elsewhere to upgrade to a 5.5. And I just feel like for one too many weeks, you'll be stuck with a minute's risk where you don't know whether or not you can feel comfortable starting him because we might not get the leak. And I think for me, that just makes him slightly too risky at this present moment. Obviously, the situation can change though.
Yeah, exactly. I think we'll kind of talk more about all these things later on, especially next week when we're beginning to really home in on where we are with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So current drafts then, where are we with everything? Obviously been a lot kind of going on over the last week. And last week with the analytics pod, I think we took a bit of time out away from the nitty gritty of FPL. And I think that today's pod as well, the highlight is going to be the 10 mistakes. I think again, the nitty gritty will be slightly neglected. It's not that it is still kind of bubbling away in the background. It's definitely something that we're kind of increasingly thinking about, talking about, debating between ourselves. I'm sure you all are as well, in whoever you speak to about FPL with. So at the moment, I'm kind of sat with near enough similar team to the first one that I presented. Oh God, was that 2 weeks ago now? So I've still got Areola and Fabianski in goal. I just don't care. I've just goalkeeper wise, as long as I know that West Ham's first open fixtures are a bit rubbish. I'm not spending more than 8.5 million on my goalkeeper pairing. Want the king and heir, and I don't know. I just think that he's likely to get saves. It is what it is with goalkeepers, and likely that I'll kind of swap over to whichever the one is looking like the one at some point. Like I'm not above using a transfer on goalkeepers, as long-term listeners of the pod will know very well. In defence, I've got two 4.0s at the moment, and that's to facilitate a further spend in midfield, which I'll talk about in a minute. So as I mentioned a little bit back, I've got Gvardiol as the 6. I've got Konsa and Anderson as the 4.5s at the moment. I think Anderson came out highest in one of my little index thingies, and I still think that he's got that kind of potential to pop up with a goal early doors and make it decent enough. See what happens with Gahey leaving, and whether that kind of spooks me on Anderson. Konsa, I just think is ridiculously good value for getting you into a Champions League level sort of team. I think the signing of Amadou and Nana is really going to help them defensively. I know David Luiz has gone, speaking to Greyhead about that earlier on this week, but I do trust Emery to make that kind of all work and have a plan. So I've got Barco, who I think for the first 4 or 5 weeks, at least to his national break, their opinion is apparently going to be missing. I think that'll do. Honestly, like I'll play Barco for the first couple of game weeks and just see where we go with that. I've got 4.0. I've got Ben Johnson in there at the moment. They've got good fixtures from 3 to 10, whatever that means. Paul on the Ipswich pod for Planet was saying that maybe Greaves is a better option, but I'll look into that later on. Really, in midfield, I've got Salah, I've got Nkunku still, I've got Jimenez now. I think that there's a bit of a. I mean, I'm still not as hot on him as you are, Sam. I know that he's been every single draft and there's been no sort of concerns. But I do think he's just one that it makes kind of sense to start with, because of the flexibility. So I can get down to most 6 or every 6.5 from him at that 7. Is he the only one at that 7 million price point? I
don't think he's the only one, but I think he's like the only relevant.
He's like Martinelli, Bumo, Rashford. Yeah. So I can get across as well if I need to go down. It shouldn't be too difficult to find 0.5. I wanted to get a Jota or something if that was the way it's going to go. So I've still got him in, and I've got a 5.5 that I've pinched 0.5 from the defence. I've got similar concerns to you over a Bob or a Rodgers. If Rodgers doesn't start the first game or the second game, could easily kind of go down to 4.9. I'm kind of a bit snookered early on because 0.1 is a 0.5. So I've got Andreas there as the 5.5 at the moment. He's the one that review favours for whatever that's worth. And I think this is probably why, and you said it in our chat, that's why you're so hot on Muniz. I don't think I quite appreciated how good Fulham's early fixtures actually are. I mean, you take away United. I mean, you can take what you want from the United game. You can kind of see that as being a difficult game. You can see that as being a hard game. More injuries at United, so maybe that'll be all right. And versus old club, if you do care about that sort of thing, that could be something which is kind of quite good. Having a stake in that first game is all right. And the Leicester and Ipswich back to back in game weeks 2 and 3, I think you trust him to get something out of those, I suppose. And even if there is a movement towards Muniz, which does seem to be happening a little bit, at least I've got some kind of coverage of that, just because he's got that sort of, he's on the set pieces, which I think later on we're going to speak about that being quite important. And up front, I'm not going to be, I think that this is probably what I'm going to start with, the heavy hitting front three of Watkins, Haaland, Isaac. But I know that those people don't have Watkins. I don't think you've got Watkins, for example. But I just kind of, I think that he's a player who will start game week 1. I think he'll just kind of keep on playing, and he's extremely durable and pretty integral to Villa, especially with John Duran looking to leave. And I want to save myself a transfer. Like, everybody in game week 3 is going to be looking to get Watkins, barring injury. And if I start with him, I don't have that problem. I can just kind of, It's not that I'm ahead of the game. I want to be I feel like I could be ahead of the curve, and it's a gamble worth taking on a player like Watkins. It's not really a gamble to me. And I say this, that I'm not really seeing him. He's a bit of differential. He's not at all. Like, he's one of the highest owned players in FPL at the moment. He's kind of, I guess, a conduit of the Twitter bubble, that sometimes you look at it and think, oh, I'm barely seeing this guy anywhere. But I think he's the second highest owned player at the moment. So, what do we know? But yeah, I think that's kind of broadly the shape I'm going to end up with. A few interchangeable parts here and there. I forgot to mention I've got a 4.5 midfielder in Harry Winks. There we go. Broadly the shape I'm going to end up with. I think I'm increasingly thinking I just start with Salah and Haaland and kind of take it from there. And I've got vague plans to wildcard either in game week 5 or 6, or leave it till game week 12 if I don't kind of wildcard around them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of where it is at the moment.
Yeah, nice. I'll go on to mine in just a second. I do share your thoughts on Watkins. I think he's obviously an incredible player. The data in some of the preseason videos I've been doing as well is not as incredible as Isaac or Haaland. So that is why I feel like I can probably shoot against him with a much cheaper asset. Moving on to my draft now, that cheaper asset is, of course, Muniz. His data in terms of XG per 90 is actually ever so slightly shading Watkins. Obviously, there are massive asterisks there. That's a shorter time frame in a worse team that you'd expect to regress a little bit. But for 3 million less, for what else I can do with my side, that's what I'm currently backing at this present moment. We have a fairly similar structure. We've both got the exact same structure in terms of the midfield 4. So that's Salah, a 7 with Eze, a 6.5, and Kunku as well. I do have space for a different 5.5. I'll come on to in just a moment's time. And in defence, the money that I've saved on Watkins has been used to bolster there. So Trent comes in alongside Gvardiol, and I've also got Munoz rather than Anderson, who is a minor upgrade that I'm willing to potentially compromise on. If I did, what I would probably end up doing is take him down to Anderson and make Harwood Bellis into Leif Davis and have them rotating, because I do like Ipswich's fixtures. I'm probably looking at wildcarding in game week 6. So I do like the rotation pairing between Anderson and Leif Davis. If I'm going to compromise on the attacking threat, I might as well have Davis in to accommodate for the games where I don't expect a clean sheet for Palace. What I also do have very quickly is Henderson in goal. So that is technically a Palace double up in defence. What I'm trying not to do is look at it as a double up. I'm just looking at it as the best 4.5 keeper that I trust at the moment. Now, if there is any warning that Johnston is potentially going to be number 1, then I'll probably be scared off of him as well. But I'm really looking around. I don't love Areola for the first 5. I think if you're looking at wildcarding later on, he's absolutely fine. But I like Palace's fixtures opening 5. I think there's a decent chance of clean sheets in 2 or 3 of them at least. Whereas other keepers, I'm either worried about them not starting or just worried about their defensive capabilities anyway. So rather than looking at it as a double up, I'm looking at each of those positions on their own merits. I think Henderson and Palace have a decent chance of clean sheets. And I think Munoz is a very good 5 million defender. Obviously, decent chance of clean sheets, but also plenty of attacking threat there as well. On to Brereton Diaz. Very, very briefly. Yes, I'm biased. Of course I am. But 0.49 XG, not XGI, XG per 90 last season for one of the worst Premier League sides we've ever seen. He's going to play out of position. He will play across our front three. To start the season, he's probably going to play centre forward because we've got the option down the right wing of Armstrong. We've got left wing kind of covered. Centre forward is well up for grabs at the moment for him. There's a very, very nominal chance he gets penalties. I would still suspect Armstrong gets them, by the way. But he should come straight in, and Southampton's fixtures opening 5 are pretty good. Looking around at all the other 5.5s, Hudson-Odoi, Pereira, all of them have less than half the XG per 90 of Brereton Diaz. So at the moment, I'm willing to take a little bit of a biased punt on that spot. And if I think he's going to be a regular starter from the off, from game week 1, I quite like it as a bit of a differential option. 0.3% owned now. So yeah, keep an eye out on him. I wouldn't want people to think I'm just purely biased. There is some data to back it up as well.
No, fair enough. I don't mind that at all. I think that slot, especially, is one where you can afford to take that sort of punt. And you know, you're a Saints fan, and it's one of those things where if there isn't like a consensus pick, if we haven't got, I don't think we had one sort of last year, did we really? But if you've got a player like in a particular area like that, why not? Brereton Diaz last year, I've got those memories of him missing quite a lot of those big chances, fluffing them, unfortunately. But you know, I mean, he's still getting the chances, so why not?
6 goals in 14.
Yeah,
for Sheffield United.
Absolutely fine. I'm not going to be kind of questioning that. The other one, the only thing I'd kind of mention is if you're looking at a 5.0 slot, I'm also Maatsen curious.
Yeah.
I don't know yet whether there'd be enough kind of behind that, but you got to think with them paying 33 million or whatever it was, and given kind of where he played on the pitch, and I think it was, I can't remember the date. I don't think the data from last year was like particularly outstanding at Dortmund, but given those fixtures from game week 3 onwards as well, he could be one that could be on the radar as well, especially if it kind of, I don't know, say you start with Munoz and it doesn't really quite work out, you know, the gate he does go and they kind of lose that defensive solidity, then you know, it gives you that kind of option to go there if Maatsen's kind of looking like he's getting in a good position. So yeah, absolutely fine with that as well.
Yep, same. The only hesitation on Maatsen would be whether or not he literally starts from the off, but obviously he's highly rated, so yeah, you would expect him to come in pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Marcus said in the chat about Minte looking good, and then Manon said that's their punt. Minte for me would be the game week 3 kind of move across from an Andreas or a game week 3 or game week 4. Like if you start with a small punt, like in some ways, I was kind of hoping that like a Johnson or something would have come in at 5.5. I knew that was never going to happen because it is Spurs. But yeah, anyone like that who's got a good first couple of games. Hudson-Odoi as well, kind of, you know, and I think Elanga actually outstatted Hudson-Odoi over the season. Just that the end of Hudson-Odoi was very, very good. Any one of those players could be quite good and could feed into Minte, depending on how that goes. But hey, you know, hopefully Barco assists him a couple of times in the first couple of games, and off we go from there.
Smith Rowe's just scored, by the way, so bandwagon
legend. What a legend! Oh man, I'm so like keen to get if it does happen. I love Smith Rowe, honestly. Like you know, the old song "Saka and Emil Smith Rowe." Like, I love that guy. It maybe would be kind of my equivalent of your Brereton Diaz punt if that happened. yeah, if he's fit, which has always been his perennial problem, then I'd have no problems getting him in, honestly. What an absolute legend of a man. What a lovely man. Right, okay, now let's move on to 10 mistakes I won't make in FPL next year, but we know we probably will. We've been looking forward to this one since we discussed it over pizza in the summer, and it's based, on our experience of playing FPL over the last few years. We've both been playing for ages now, basically, and as mentioned at the top, hopefully there's something that will help you, as even the most experienced managers and better ones than us in terms of overall ranks will have fallen into these traps many times. Hopefully it just gives you something to watch out for, something to consider, and the Sam mentioned earlier on, something to refer back to as the season goes on. And we both came up with kind of 5, put our heads together, kind of negotiated what kind of ones we were going to kind of talk about. Hopefully this is kind of a nice sort of, I guess, level. They're not too niche, and there are things which hopefully are going to be just watch outs effectively for the season going forward. I think we've done several incarnations of this in WGTA, from golden rules, unwritten rules, and all that sort of stuff. But I think this is kind of a nice way of, I guess, getting at the fabric of FPL a little bit and helping us kind of think, how do we manage a little bit better? And for context, if you're new here, I had 5 awful years on WGTA, honestly awful years, where I had six figure ranks over and over again, and then kind of, I suppose, last couple of years I've tried to knuckle down a little bit more, and it's really helped me. So we are going to hopefully continue that, and I hope this will help me, you, both of us, all of us, try to be better for the season going forward. Cool. What's the first mistake that we've got here, Sam?
First one, I think it's one of yours, which is I will not try to be too clever, which I think makes a lot of sense to me already without explanation. But I think as this is one that you led the way on, would you care to explain to the listeners what you mean by this?
Yeah, I think that this is definitely, it's a qualitative one, but a lot of the time it's not going for the talisman, going for that esoteric kind of other pick and thinking, oh, you know what, there's a player who's 10% owned, the player is 0.5% owned. I'm going to go for 0.5% owned player just because,
for the sake of it.
It'll look even better when it comes off. It'll be good for my social media. It'll feel a lot more satisfying to get that sort of really kind of small punt. I think you can definitely fall into the trap of just scarcity, isn't it? Like you feel like the scarcer a player's ownership is, the more you'll stand to benefit, and that can lead you down all sorts of paths where actually you end up with a player that you don't really rate that much. You kind of in the moment think is quite cool. Thinking last year when I bought Harvey Barnes over buying Anthony Gordon and robbed myself of 30, 40 points. I got into top 100k at the very, very end on the last day. I'd have been comfortably, I'd maybe have challenged 50k if I hadn't done that. Obviously, there's loads of other things around that, but trying not to be too clever is definitely something that has affected me an awful lot throughout my time doing this podcast. Removing high ticket players and replacing them with other players because of a fixture swing. Just trying to get an advantage which was a bit of a high roll effectively if it was going to come off, and more often than not it just doesn't. Taking hits when it didn't need to, and this year especially with rolling, and if you can keep rolling, I suppose there's a higher incentive to not do that, as we mentioned kind of a few pods back, but also there's, I guess, an incentive as well to just try not to, just keep it simple effectively a lot of the time, like just the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And there's been so many times I think where I've kind of just fallen off a tiny bit really by just trying to outthink what is actually quite a simple game. Like at the start of the year, there's all these sort of different kind of modes flying around when you kind of look at it and think, oh yeah, there's all different ways I could kind of set it up. As the season does progress, yes, there are kind of obviously times you can attack and times you can defend. I think we'll talk about that, I think, at the very, very end actually. But try not to be too clever is something that definitely affects me as someone who thinks about FPL an awful lot, just as a bit of an addiction really. And fixating on becoming overly attached to relying too much on availability heuristic. Like all of these things are things that I'm going to try to avoid this year, because when Lucy was on, that try not to be too clever was, after 5 years of crap ranks, I genuinely did just try to keep it really simple, and it really worked. Last year, there were a couple of times, as I've documented, where I did perhaps slip back into old habits of trying to be too flashy, trying to be too clever. And I think that's just a really important kind of check for me, really, for how I play the game a little bit. Just because a player is a massive differential doesn't mean necessarily that he's the best option, effectively, in a lot of ways.
100%. And I don't want to add on too much to that because you've summarized it perfectly, but I think that the key takeaway there is points are not boring. Like, we're playing this game for points, and okay, fine, it might be a really boring, dull pick in your eyes, but if they're the player that you expect to genuinely score the most points, go for them, because at the end of the day, you're not going to really remember how excited you were by the player that you brought in. The Barnes versus Gordon one is a really good example there. And I think, at the end of the day, I want points on the board. Some people play FPL for different reasons, by the way. That is absolutely fine. But we're playing, I think I can speak for both of us, for a high rank. And points are just not boring. So if it seems like a boring pick, that's probably because there's some good sound logic behind it. Maybe don't overthink it too often.
It's so much easier than done, isn't it?
Yeah, way easier. This is a mistake I'll definitely make.
Yeah, exactly. He says transferring Emil Smith-Rowe into his FPL team immediately.
Exactly. I've got Brereton Diaz in my squad right now. Like, I'm being too clever. But anyway.
It's game week 1. All right, Sam, you're up next, I think.
I am indeed. So one that really hit home for me from an example in particular last season, any long-time listeners will remember this, but acting on limited news. Now, I usually tend to think I'm quite a conservative manager when it comes to news. I act fairly late on in most game weeks. I don't chase prices too much, especially not later on in the season where it matters less. But there was one example last season which bit me on the arse in probably the most spectacular way imaginable, where I think we were getting towards game week 35, 36. It was one of the final double game weeks of the season. I think it was bench boost week as well for a lot of us, including myself. And I got through, I think, 80-90% of the press conferences on the Friday. I was at work. I saw that Richarlison was meant to be fit. He was going to be the differential I brought in that week. That was my plan. And so I saw the press conference and he was good to go. So I was like, right, I got the news I needed. I'm going to make the transfer, because what am I waiting for? I might as well get it done. I'm a bit busy. I won't have much time tomorrow. So I'll get it sorted. 2 things then happened. Well, actually 3 things happened. First of all, Postecoglou's press conference was not the final word on Richarlison. There was a Brazilian national team press conference that came out later that day that said, oh, by the way, he's now injured and will miss the Copa America. So that's an issue. So I'd already made the transfer before that. But then also when I'm talking about this mistake in particular, I think that is unlucky, because I acted on full news on Richarlison. I wasn't to know that Postecoglou was lying. That's different. But I didn't wait for some of the other press conferences to finish where I had players from, I think it was Brighton, for instance. I had Joao Pedro in my side. And I thought, okay, I've got the news I needed to make the transfer. But actually, I should have waited for all of the press conferences and all of the news to come through, because knowing that another player that could be injured is injured would have completely changed my transfer path, and meant that I probably wouldn't bring in Richarlison for an already fit player. I would have just removed Joao Pedro for another player, not had to take a -4. And in the end, it got worse and worse that day. I think Van der Ven was, who was it? Udogie, Udogie, I think was
hospital,
one,
wasn't it? Yeah,
yeah. There was another. There's another one as well that got injured last minute, and it basically all just went downhill very, very quickly.
Comedy of errors, wasn't it?
It was awful. And I waited until what I considered to be fairly late on, but because I was missing 1 or 2 press conferences that I kind of disregarded, because I just assumed, why would my player be injured all of a sudden? I should have waited. And that is one mistake that I'm really going to try and avoid this season look at the bigger picture, the full 15 when waiting on news, rather than just waiting for that one isolated piece of news to make a transfer. I need to see the full picture, the full puzzle before moving forward.
Yes, every why hath a wherefore, from Comedy of Errors. Yes, I'm with you completely. I was really, I guess, burnt in the COVID season by doing that. Making transfers when there was still a little bit of time left. Just thinking, oh right, I've got everything I need now. And these are really extreme examples, and you had like genuinely almost unlucky days I think I've ever seen anyone go through. Like if 2 words in a WhatsApp could speak volumes, like you were just fuming.
FPL, I was laughing by the end because it was just
I
so
know.
funny.
It went from anger to just kind of like, oh my god, you kind of wanted another player to be injured, didn't you? At that point, you're just like, how just make it terrible. When you've got a really bad game week, you just want to get the 24 pointer or something like that. You want to get the worst game we've ever had.
I did get a green arrow that week on a -16 though. Just put out there.
You did. So I agree with you. Sometimes we are shooting in the dark, and that can be a bit of a problem. So with Watkins last year, we both sold him, didn't we? Thinking that with it being unsure whether he'd be fit or not. I remember Saka versus Bournemouth as well. There was a lot of doubts about him because he yet again hobbled off, and we were looking at him thinking, oh, is he replaceable? And there are other moves I wanted to make, and I kind of use that as an excuse. Look, I mean, there are going to be occasions where we're shooting in the dark. This year, with the role being actually something which is quite tangible in value for us as managers, maybe again that is going to help steady our hand when we are in that situation. But I think that kind of situation is very in extremis, the one that you mentioned. I feel like it's one of those things you'll have once in your managerial career, touch wood, but yeah, acting on limited news is always really important, is always really something that we should be so wary of. And if anything, I do try to wait for the embargo, or we all hate leakers, right? It's not something that is particularly surprising. We not hate them as people, but hate the influence that has over FPL. But with the 90-minute deadline, it's just there. That's just how it is now. And it doesn't seem that there's any value unless you physically cannot get to a computer or your phone for whatever reason. Then maybe sometimes you do have to make that move in the dark. But just all the information you can possibly get before you make your transfer. It sounds silly, but that can be the difference between you saving a transfer and things sort themselves out organically because suddenly, he has traveled, or, he has been in the warm up. That can be, the difference between taking a player out that you want to buy back immediately, therefore incurring like a -4. And you just kind of continuing to float along kind of quite a good path. And it doesn't take very much to throw you off track. And a little bit of kind of news coming out after you've made your transfer, when you've made it kind of needlessly early, can be, it can be very annoying, can't it? Right. My one is up next. A little bit of a different one, potentially. I don't know with how many people this particular one will chime. I will not stop watching football regularly. So I think that during seasons, sometimes, especially if you watch football through the lens of FPL, it can have a really sort of warping effect on football, because you do watch it and all you see is missed chances in terms of missed chances for FPL returns. The name that always comes to my head is Ben Chilwell for some reason. Just because whenever you watch him play, he's flipping dangerous. He's always in those ridiculous sort of Estupinian style positions. You always kind of think, oh, that was a missed assist, or he could have scored there. Well, that would have been like a massive points bonanza for me. But however it is, if you've had a bad week, or you've had having a few bad weeks, or you kind of your differential didn't quite fire off. I remember, I think last year Argentina Livramento at the very end of the season, and he missed a really good early chance in one of the games, and it would have been obviously transformative if he scored, because he was 0.9% owned or something ridiculous. But stuff like that. Sometimes, if you are a bit fatigued by FPL can make you switch off watching football, and just. But you miss so much, don't you? You miss all of the things that Simon was talking about last week that don't quite appear in the stats, which help you gather information, help you continue to, I guess, stay up to date with the character of the season, how certain teams are progressing, what certain teams' strengths are, weaknesses, certain players who have flourished suddenly because new managers come in or a new system's been introduced. If you don't watch football anymore, you miss that. For me, because I come at FPL not as somebody who particularly kind of loves playing football. I come at FPL through loving football through gaming. Like, I love Football Manager, Championship Manager as it was back then as a kid. I love Pro Evo. I was never particularly good at football, but like I love kind of games which were based on football, and that's how I got into football. That's how, obviously, that lends itself to FPL quite strongly. But the kind of you can kind of stop watching the source material sometimes, and notoriously, Simon March, who won it back in 2015, I think it was, never watched the game. He was living out in Singapore, but you missed out so much information, like just qualitative information. You miss out on so much through not watching football regularly, even if it's just the highlights. I do try to catch 1 or 2 games every kind of weekend. So hard now with a child, obviously, but I do try to, and just not turning off because I'm depriving myself of a lot of information. I know we're going to try to kind of, when we do like a proper next week, the proper kind of preview pod, we'll try to do that, or at least game week 1 after that has happened, we'll try to kind of institute like a Price's Point or something like that, where you've got your kind of eye test. But I think it's always good for me to bring a little bit more to the table as well, where that's concerned. That's something I've seen, because we can debate it as well, and it just kind of helps you with your fortunes if you just at least kind of keep your eye and make sure you keep watching the highlights. And something that I want to try to do more this season, and kind of try to, I guess, separate my FPL head from just watching football. Or even if I'm having a bad time, it could be quite good to watch and kind of figure out why I'm having a bad time. If I'm backing this player because the underlying stats are good, but I watch and they're doing the Darwin, the finishing skill is deficient, then maybe it's good. It's always good for me to know. So yeah, bit of a niche point potentially. I might not chime with everybody, but that's I think that's kind of a really big one for me that I'm going to try to avoid.
Yeah, and I think you've summarised the FPL side of that really well. Just to add on very, very briefly, I obviously supported a championship club last season, and it meant that I was watching very regular non-FPL related football, and it was really refreshing. It was great fun to actually watch a game and not worry about, has my 5.5 million midfielder got an assist yet? It really reinstilled my love for the game, and I would hate to lose that just because most of what I watch is FPL based. I think when you're having a tough time in this game, it's easy to just be like, I need to switch the TV off. I'm not enjoying the football at all. But if you can try and separate the two slightly sometimes and just enjoy the game for what it is, the drama of it, the systems that are on show as well. We started playing in the first place in most cases because we really enjoy football. So obviously I know that's not technically everyone, but I think in the majority that is true. And I would hate to lose that spark for the game if my FPL season isn't going that well. So that's just a small additional add-on point to number 3 here.
Cool. All right. Next one. Quite a meaty one, I think, this one.
Yeah, this is potentially quite a meaty one. I think I've gone through it once or twice, either at the back end of last season or at the start of this. I can't remember. But one thing I'm really keen not to do this season is get kind of swayed throughout the week as decisions are being made away from my own gut instinct that I nailed down at the start of the week. I think too often last season I absorbed so much content and so many different narratives from Twitter to YouTube to articles all around the place that by the end of the week, I can't even remember what my genuine opinion is or was at the start of the week. So I'm going to be much more, not stubborn, because I don't want to be closed-minded in the sense that I can't be swayed no matter what, even if good data is presented to me to sway me against that. But I want to be able to remind myself what my opinion was at the start and really try and build a case to say that that opinion needs to be dismissed. If I can't build a legitimate case against it, then I don't want to lose track of what my own gut and my own instinct is, because at the end of the day, I've watched football for quite a while, and I am playing this game because I think I know what I'm talking about. We all are. And I don't want to just be acting on other people's opinions that have kind of just been absorbed into my brain throughout the week. And quite often those opinions, because I'm listening and watching and absorbing so much content, they can be contradictory week on week, and it can send me in a multiple different avenues every single week. And I end up just going around in circles because I'm not following a clear path anymore. So yeah, having a bit more clarity as to what my own thought process and my own gut instinct is at the start of the week, and being open to changing it, but make sure that it's based on sound reasoning and logical data if I am going to change that.
Many years ago, on this very pod, I said that at the start of each week, I write down what my first thought is, and then kind of see how it goes throughout the week. And I've kept that up. I've got a notepad. I did have a notepad. I've changed my phone actually, so crap, I need to get that back. Obviously, it's all irrelevant now. But it's literally just game week 16. Player X looking quite decent, maybe swap him in for Y, all of these little kind of stupid things that you write to yourself. And it's just very helpful for that exact reason. So, you've got your sexy spreadsheet, just have another tab and just have game week 1 and 2 all the way down, and just have just put your notes in there maybe. I mean, I think you're right. It can be incredibly difficult. And this is my problem for the first 5 years, when I was really, really kind of enmeshed in the FPL community, trying to consume as much content as I possibly could. I end up getting lost. And it can happen. There are loads of best managers out there than me, who are able to absorb all this information and be strong-willed about what you're going to do, be it through confidence, be it through big-headedness, whatever. For me, it was kind of, maybe because I've got kind of a sense of humility about me. I was just willing to listen to what people were saying, and didn't really kind of, counter that as much of what I thought. And the eventual kind of output of that is just a confused mess, because one week you're thinking, oh, this, I really like what this person's saying, and next week, it's not really gone that well, and then you find someone else, and you get all these sorts of things like confirmation bias, which can also kind of feed into all this sort of instinct, I guess, and you lose it. You lose where you're going. I think it's very good to home in on what you really like in terms of content, and just kind of stick to it. And hopefully those listening, watching will stick to us throughout the course of this year. But excising, and just kind of making sure that you find stuff which works for you within your context is really important. Like, listen to Planet, listen to a couple of others, like Always Cheating, FPL General, listen to The Wire if I possibly can, all of these bits and pieces. But some of it is about just trying to make sure that all of this is balanced with, as you were kind of getting at, Sam, where you are, and trying to make sure that you've got a handle on that. So just having something written down on the Sunday or the Monday when the game week closes, because throughout the week your psychology changes, doesn't it? Like, end of the week you may be smarting, or you may be like really, really happy about how your game week's gone, and by Thursday or Friday you feel completely different. And making sure that you've got a record of how you felt to reference back to is always really important. So I think that's a really good one.
Thank you. On to point number 5. This is one of yours. So very pertinent after last week even. So go for it.
I will not dismiss review as quickly. So it only really came to mind after speaking to Simon, of course. But I think last year, a lot of the time, it wasn't like I was laughing at review, but sometimes we did kind of see a few paths, a few lines, a few suggestions from the solver where you look at it and go, what the F is it going on about? I've got no idea where it's coming from. That's ridiculous. I don't really like that player. I don't want to remove this player. But you'd see, the FPL review slaves, followers doing that online. and suddenly, they'd be ahead of the curve on these things. And I think being more open to FPL review, basically. And I think if you did listen, if you haven't listened to it, go back to listen to it because it's very good. But if not, there's so much in common between us as kind of, if you're not an FPL review user or a sometime kind of analytics kind of embracer, to those who are fully sort of converted. There's so much in common because all we're trying to do is solve the same problem. How do I score the most points in FPL? And ignoring that source, which has elicited such incredible results, so many people, does feel a bit fallacious. So maybe it's just a bit of just something I've got to kind of try to address. I'm not going to become a review robot. I'm still going to, because I don't really find that fun. Which sounds a bit bad, but I don't really find it as fun. I do like to kind of ensure I've got my own thoughts layered in and decisions, which if they go well are great. If not, I will wear. But I think I think dismiss is obviously quite a strong word, but maybe not doubting review as much, or at least being kind of open to considering what the solver's got to say is certainly something which has become high in mind after our chat with Simon last week.
Yeah, again, not too much to add on that. Just that maybe a slight metaphor that I see review as a little bit of the Doctor Strange in Endgame, or whichever Marvel movie it was, I can't remember, where he can see every single possible permutation and universe and can kind of map out the different routes to take. And we're humble human beings. We can't map out everything that quickly. So review will guide us through quite a lot of paths all at once and do the thinking for us. It's not one to just follow blindly. Obviously, we discussed that last week at length. So do go and visit that pod if you want a full recap of that. But I think it's something that I don't want to dismiss, much like you, because it can often see different angles that maybe we haven't thought of yet, and it can at least open my mind to those possibilities. So yeah, very, very good one on number 5, Tom.
Nice. I think number 6 as well. We can get through fairly rapidly. Or
yeah,
the hour now, Sam.
Yeah, we can probably zoom through number 6. It's a pretty simple one, but one that I do often forget at times, or maybe not giving myself or giving it enough thought. Is don't underestimate the set piece takers. Obviously, penalties is a big part of that, but I'm not just referring to penalties here. I'm also referring to corners and free kicks. I think far too often I'll look as far as penalty takers and think, oh, great, I've got myself a pen taker, or at least seemingly, and then kind of disregard if a player is on set pieces, on corners or on free kicks as an advantage. I don't often look at it as an advantage. And then the very next week you'll see assist up for, I don't know, a Trent or something, or Porro even, probably a better example, for a corner or a free kick, where I'd actually completely disregarded that and gone down a different route. So yeah, I think it's a quick one. It's a simple one, but I do need to keep that in the forefront of my mind when making decisions. Are these players on set pieces? And if they are, does it bring them level or even put them above other options that in open play maybe marginally shade them?
Oh. So James Ward-Prowse then, Sam?
Yeah, he's perfect. I love it. Although the annoying thing about Ward-Prowse is every season he does end up getting decent points. So you just can never, because he has almost no open play threat, he's probably just too many notches down to become relevant as a set piece taker. I think if his underlying data from open play was even slightly better, he would probably weigh into this point a lot more heavily. But because he's just so far down on the open play stuff, even having the set pieces doesn't really help him too much. And one thing on Ward-Prowse is he's not a great penalty taker. Even if he gets penalties, he's a bit Watkins-esque. I think he's got about 60% success ratio just from eyeballing it, because I had to live through quite a few of them and some pretty nervy moments when he's taking a penalty. I didn't feel ever that confident.
It's just it's range, isn't it? Because he steps back and he can't quite kind of get the depth of field right. So
yeah, he needs to be 30 yards out, otherwise it just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Or he's thinking it's a corner and he can smack, he can score like that. No, completely right. The only kind of thing with set pieces as well, which I think we need to kind of slightly address, is that does that include penalties for you?
Yeah. Why?
Okay.
What do you mean? Why wouldn't it?
Just because, like, I think it's a different discussion almost.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Do you underestimate set piece takers, or do you underestimate penalty takers? Because those two things are quite different. Like, obviously the extreme case is at the start of the 2021 season when they were giving out penalties like confetti. And whereas I think we kind of we looked at it last year, didn't we? And there was a penalty every sort of 3 games, something ridiculous.
Yeah, there was a very high amount. Yeah.
So it can be quite important, even if we're not kind of going to a Miljovic level when he was at Palace, when he seems to get a penalty every game, sort of thing. But players like your man Eze, Andreas, etc. Like, even though I don't count penalties as much a lot of the time, the online data, like, I look at it like as a bonus rather than like something which is kind of innate to the player that if I'm assessing them in terms of their overall sort of offering, it is something nonetheless which maybe can be a bit of a game, like a bit of a kicker, I suppose, when you're deciding between two very similar assets. Like, so I don't know. So, say Solanke goes to Spurs. And you're deciding on Son versus Saka. So say that Salah kind of falls off the wagon, it doesn't seem very good, and a Jota or something seems a better player. So you've got 10 million spare, you can't quite get to Palmer. You got Son versus Saka on the table. Saka's got penalties, and say Solanke takes pens for Spurs now, then Son doesn't. So maybe that could be the difference if both players are statting similarly. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit of too much to esoteric, but I think that can be perhaps where underestimating set pieces can also kind of bleed into our decision making.
Yeah, for sure. I think under this point, the penalties obviously weigh a lot heavier than the free kicks and the corners. Penalty takers are precious in FPL, especially in the sides that do win a lot of penalties. Those are the sides that attack more, by the way, and have tricky wingers that get into the box more often, that find the feet of defenders more often in the box. So Chelsea were very, very good at it last season. Man United in seasons past, Bruno got 9-10 penalties, something like that, and obviously boosted his numbers greatly. So yeah, do not underestimate the power of a penalty taker. But yeah, I did also mean, as an extension to that, free kicks and corners as well, to a lesser extent, of course.
Yeah, cool. All right then. Moving on to the next one.
Cool.
Yeah, and I will not underestimate the impact of one game week. Like, this is one of those which is, again, potentially a little bit niche, but I think it makes a lot of sense, because sometimes you think that one player, one outrageous captaincy call or something like that is going to reinvent the wheel for you, like really transform your fortunes. I suppose you can kind of, if you're having a bit of a bad time in FPL, maybe just get into that comfort blanket of thinking, well, if this one thing goes well for me, then everything's going to change. And sometimes it does. You do see kind of the odd isolated story on social media of one person who's captained, like someone niche one week, and they've then gone off and scored a hat trick, and suddenly they've halved their rank or entered the top 10k out of nowhere. These things are so memorable because they don't happen very often, honestly. Yeah. Like, it most of the time, the Hail Marys, the high rolls, they don't pay off for you. And one game week, if you're just kind of thinking, you're right, I'm going to, there's a really good fixture against Ipswich this week for this one player, I'm going to buy them in, and then hopefully it goes well that week, and I'll see what happens, at the detriment for my long-term plan, which was actually to do something else or roll the transfer, because I want to then target the next game week when I can make a couple of transfers, or this year, I can make 3 or 4 going forward. I suppose just thinking that if there's one week that's in front of you, which you want to make a transfer to just target that week, but that player then runs into a tough run of fixtures, or there's something that kind of means that it's opportunity cost, effectively, that you're kind of depriving yourself of future options. I think sometimes we can fall into the churn of social media and all the content that you hear where, we'll be saying that, this week, I really wish I owned this player. And we've all done it where you kind of think, oh, screw it. I'm going to buy this player and just go for it. I'm going to go either captain him or just the fact that I own this player is going to be absolutely flipping amazing. It doesn't happen. Richarlison versus Luton is probably a good example from last year where he should have scored twice within the first 10 minutes, end up doing absolutely nothing, getting subbed off in very early in the second half. So you can, I don't know, I think you can see this in those different ways, but I don't know. I should have written overestimate the impact of one game week I've just seen.
I was going to say I'm not sure which way we're going there.
That's kind of what I should have written actually there for that one. Apologies, but that's where I kind of went to with that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think far too often, I remember as well, a good example from last season was Wolves were playing, I think it was Sheffield United at home. They had just come into a bit of form. I think Sarabia was looking good. Hwang Hee-chan as well, I think was doing very well. There was a bit of a bandwagon forming. Everyone felt that they were kind of missing out if they didn't get on them. And it obviously I think they won 2-0 and it just didn't. None of the players that were relevant really did much. I think maybe one player did. I can't remember which one, but barely anyone owned them. It was the one player that 1% of the game owned. And yeah, I think whilst, okay, they're expected to do well in one game week, or you can set up a side to perfectly attack one game week, very often, as we saw with the free hit last season as well, in the popular double game week, blank game week to do it, it does end up being a little bit of a bit of a rubbish one. It doesn't quite work out the way you want to, and planning over several game weeks tends to work out slightly better than planning for one game week and really attacking week in, week out. So I think if one game week you're expecting a slightly below par score and you're okay with embracing that for the longer term benefit of your side, I think that's the way to play it.
The only exception to this is doubles.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. Where why not?
Yeah.
But
there's more to attack.
They tend to come towards the end of the season where things are a lot more sharpened. You haven't really got that much time left to recover, and you might as well go for it. The risk sort of calculation changes a little bit, and you can underestimate the impacts of one game week if you're kind of thinking, I'm going to stick with X and because they've done really well for me over the course of the season. But mostly that's one that I've got to try to potentially slightly calm down on over the course of the next year. Next one.
Cool. On to the next one. I will not disregard the player and the team quality in my decision making, meaning last season and actually, to be honest, for several seasons now, I've probably maybe put too much weight into fixtures and in some cases maybe underestimated how much of an impact the team quality and the player quality makes on the performance of them as a fantasy asset. So Arsenal defence was a good example last season when they ran into some poor fixtures, expected far less out of them. Because the team quality is so high, they were still able to churn out clean sheets on a pretty regular basis. And that goes for a very good attack, let's say a Liverpool or a Man City. Just because they're running into some slightly less than amazing fixtures, they are the difficult fixture. They are the player that is able, so Salah, Haaland, for example, they are the player that is able to take on the best teams and still do well. That just because Man City are playing Arsenal doesn't mean neither team get any points anywhere. Someone's going to get points somewhere. It's about picking where you think those points are going to come from. And the higher quality player, the higher quality team are going to be more likely to persevere even in tougher fixtures than some of the worst quality players and teams against other worse quality opposition. So the way I'd probably like to think about it more this season is, okay, Southampton play Ipswich at home, let's say. I can't remember what game week it is, but we'll play them at home at some point. and Man City and Arsenal will probably play each other at home. Will play each other at home at some point as well. Obviously, on the ticker, Ipswich is a very, very easy fixture. It's green. On the ticker, Arsenal is a red fixture. It's about as difficult as it's going to get. But Southampton are of the same or similar quality to Ipswich, so they will probably struggle just as much against an Ipswich as a Man City would against an Arsenal, who again are on a similar kind of stratosphere, let's say. So yes, if you've got an easier set of fixtures, it might bring other players into focus. So Southampton fixtures looking good. Obviously, their players come into focus more, but you also do need to weigh in the fact that they are, unfortunately for me, a worse team than a Man City, and therefore the good fixtures aren't quite as good for them as they would be for a much, much better team.
Yeah. I mean, that's sometimes taking the emotion out of it almost.
Yeah.
And just the fact is, and it's about talisman theory, do read that, please humour me. But the fact is that a lot of the FPL relevant assets are all congregate to the teams that you'd expect them to congregate in, a lot outside of a few sort of select individuals who tend to be talisman. You said it, go and read it. And you're completely right that sometimes you do have this sort of pull towards a certain individual for whatever reason. You may just really like the player, they may have done well for you on FPL in the past, whatever. But trying to be cold and rational about decision making in FPL is so important. And as you say, Sam, sometimes it is about just making sure that you balanced it correctly. Player and team quality and decision making is really important a lot of the time. Do you bet on asset A whose team are on an upward trajectory towards Champions League, or player B whose team are maybe not kind of on a downward trajectory because you wouldn't be considering them, but just looking to kind of stay in the Prem effectively? Sometimes it can be better to go for the better team because the better team produce better data, and therefore the player does tend to perform better. Talisman, maybe the talisman factor can be quite key there sometimes. Like if you're buying a cog in a wheel, a certain player who may be part of points being shared around, that could be slightly different versus Mitrovic at Fulham, for example. You'd always want to buy that individual, even though they as a team were not going to be challenging for titles or whatever. With all due respect to Fulham, you would still kind of value that perhaps. So maybe that would be maybe that would kind of be a bit of an additional factor to consider, like how talismanic that player is, whether they are part of a supporting cast or whether they are the main man. But a lot of the time you're completely right. Like player and team quality should be in FPL, which is quite a zero-sum brutal game, be the way that you kind of eventually make the decision.
Absolutely. And on to number 9. This is back to you, Tom, the penultimate one.
Yes, I will not default to the narrative. Oh, good lord! This is one which I think links back to a few things that we've kind of touched on a little bit in terms of losing track of your own instinct earlier on due to the maelstrom of FPL content out there. I love the word maelstrom. I seem to keep saying that a lot.
Word of the day.
Exactly. But yeah, defaulting to narrative can often mean that on one given week you're buying a player, and just because everyone else is buying them, because they're the hot thing in FPL Twitter, and they're the hot thing on the content creators that you listen to, everyone's kind of going there. I think just thinking about it critically, similar to what we spoke about on point 4, is just really important. And it can be overwhelming sometimes. We've all been there. We've all kind of bought the player who did really well last week. And we all know what happens in FPL when you buy the player who did really well last week. What they do next week, they blank. Inevitably, that's just literally what happens. The top point scorer will go on and do bugger all next week, unless the name's Danny Ings or Jesse Lingard. But yeah, I think not kind of defaulting to the narrative is slightly distinct from not losing track of your own instincts, just because sometimes if you don't if you're not sure on the decision you're making, you do often kind of fall into the herd mentality where you just kind of think, well, I don't want to lose out on the points that everyone else is getting, and you want to protect your own position. Greed and fear, the two kind of key parts of herd mentality. So I think that trying to treating the narrative, and there is a narrative, I hate it, but it does kind of happen. There's always one kind of hot key topic which is out there, and we will talk about that during the course of the season, of course, and try to be objective about it. We do try our very, very best to do that, but not defaulting to the popular pick for that week, not kind of falling prey to the churn when a certain player is involved in that sort of churn because he's done 3 goals in the last 2 games. But as we mentioned with Simon last week, those goals are all scored from 0.05 XG chances. Linking in again to not stop watching football regularly and all these other things as well. I think it's easy to get swept along, isn't it, Sam? But I think it's also really important to kind of just have a moment to yourself where you just think, all right, deep breath, clear thinking. Do I really believe that this player is actually going to be a continuing sustainable source of points? Or is it actually maybe better for me to just give it a miss? And sometimes it does go against you, like Almiron or something like that. But more often than not, a player who has become like a very kind of short-term bandwagon, who's only kind of the last couple of weeks kind of shot to prominence, is going to be kind of one that often does sort of burn out.
Yeah, I think with this one, it's quite a nuanced and quite difficult point to get right throughout the season because it's difficult to weigh each one up on their own merits. I think a narrative builds on a player more often than not because there are qualities to that player that are worth assessing. Narratives don't just form out of absolutely nothing more often than not anyway. But I think what you need to do once a narrative is building and you are starting to feel the temptation to also pursue that narrative is try and cut back and cut away from all of the noise moving around the player and just try and look quite cold-heartedly about what the data is and kind of maybe just take yourself offline for a little bit and assess the games, assess what you're seeing rather than just what everyone else says you should be seeing. The data will be there. I'm sure you've got your own process if you're listening on how you pick a good player, how you determine whether a player is worth picking. And like I said, a bit similar to point 4, what your own instinct was at the start of the week. Are you being presented with data and logical reasoning to dissuade you from your own initial instincts? Or is a bit of groupthink happening and you've seen something else that you believe is fundamentally a more satisfying route for you? And yeah, sometimes the narrative is going to be the best way to go. So definitely don't just dismiss it out of hand because it's a narrative and because something's forming, but take it almost as a signal that, okay, this is a player I need to have a look at, and then make your own judgment call based on the data that you're able to find rather than just blindly following the narrative.
I mean, it has to be balanced, though. So I'm not saying never follow narrative. Like often, the template is a template for a reason, and we shouldn't be sat there being maverick for the sake of being maverick. So it's a lot about a case by case basis because I think there can be certainly that kind of groupthink, as you say, about a certain player, suddenly vaunted as a potential Ballon d'Or winner, when in fact there are kind of holes in that. It's very easy to present the case for any player as being kind of worth your time. If you boil down anything to per 90, per start, points per million, Christ, are we in that's a 2017, 2018 thing we used to look at. But all these things get wheeled out as ways to support the narrative for an individual. It comes back to something called framing in behavioral science, where you can kind of present data in any way you want, removing certain aspects, create a foreground in certain aspects. Just be a lot more. Just think critically about FPL as much as you possibly can, and if you do devote as much of your brain space to FPL as we do, it can be quite good. Again, to just take that deep breath every now and again and think, Christ, really? Maybe not. And more often than not, it probably is going to be okay. Effective ownership is always a thing, but it's not going to. I don't know. As I said earlier on, with the overestimating the impact of one game week, I wish I got that right. But it's not. It more often than not will not destroy your season to be missing out on one particular player, especially if you believe after thinking about it a bit, actually, it's not worth it. Cool. And final one, Sam.
Final one, and it's one of mine. And it's one that, again, I was probably a victim of last season more than other seasons past. And I completely forgot to ever really go full aggressive, full on the attack in FPL last season. It's kind of more of a subjective thing rather than anything else, because what is going on the attack really? Like, it's just all we're ever doing is picking the players we think are going to score the most points. But I think most of us probably listening to this pod will be able to relate to the idea that most weeks, or at least for the majority of the season, I guess, you're kind of just playing week to week a little bit. Yes, you've got a plan, but you're also more often than not picking players that just make logical sense. There's a lot of safety to it. Yes, you think they're going to score the most points, but there is an element of just kind of making up the numbers each week, and maybe it does become a bit templatey, which we know does happen at times. But there does come a time for a lot of us, if we're still chasing a rank and we're not at the position we want to be, that you have to go a little bit on tilt, or you have to do something to try and stick out from the crowd. And I was quite adamant that I didn't need to do that last season. I never really felt that I was so far behind that I really needed to twist rather than stick. And the game weeks just started running out. I never really threw a Hail Mary pass or did anything crazy until right at the last minute. And by that point, it was too late, and I got myself in a bit of a muddle there. Obviously, the -16 didn't help, as I mentioned. But I think there is a lot to be said for kind of planning out the moments that you think are best to attack. So finding a good patch of fixtures for a good team, or try to figure out a chip strategy that maybe other players aren't going to be on, or using a free hit in a slightly different way to how generally the player base is using it that week. All of these are examples, as well as different captaincy options as well, where if you're chasing by a fair few points come the back 9-10 game weeks, that could be the difference. And last season, I don't think I really was brave enough to do that. I think I got caught up in the first season of being on this pod, being like a YouTuber as well in my own right, and maybe got a little bit scared of sticking out from the crowd at times. And I really want to make sure I don't do that this season. And when my gut's telling me I need to go on the attack, I will be brave enough to do so.
I think Marcus in the chat, so he twisted more and more last season. Obviously, he had a really good finish.
He did, yeah.
Sometimes it depends where you're twisting from, quite a lot. So are you twisting from, like, sometimes you get to a certain point and it's about consolidation for you, because you get to kind of where you're happy with, you get to kind of the top 20k or something like that, and you think, oh well, if the season ends here, I'm more than happy with that. Obviously the impetus is always to try to get that sort of 3-figure, 2-figure, 1-figure rank. But for a lot of us, I think you're looking at kind of hoping for top 100k. I think is probably a decent finish these days, as we know. I know, Sam, I mean, I know you've spoken about obviously the fact that you're kind of exposed on social media and exposed as being a YouTuber. Do you think that there's any, I know that we've always kind of, you're not a cautious manager by any stretch of the imagination. You're a considered manager, slightly more considered than I am. I mean, what kind of tangible steps do you think you'll take to make sure you go on the attack? Think about all the things that we've spoken about in terms of, not acting on limited news, which is something that you can obviously I think you had a really bad experience last year. You're not going to track of your own instincts. We've spoken about how you maybe sort of try to deal with that, and also with the decision making in my ones as well. It's not false to the narrative. I mean, how do you think you're going to try to make sure you go on the attack a bit more? Do you think it's just more, as you said, just trying to stick out a little bit from the crowd in some picks, or is it kind of in those considerations perhaps where you would have stuck or you would have gone for a more sort of sensible pick, going for one that you truly believed in? Like, how would you think you're going to bring this to the fore?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one I've kind of prepared for a little bit. So my idea of how I'm going to go on the attack this season more is try and pick out patches of fixtures or specific very good fixtures in advance, well in advance, so 5-6 game weeks ahead of time. And rather than just kind of dipping my toe in the water with them and try to balance myself out across 5 or 6 game weeks and just make sure that I'm covering off most of the base picks, try and figure out what I truly believe is going to happen in a select few fixtures. And if I see one where I think, you know what, that could be a high scorer, that this game is here for Liverpool for the taking, for instance, or there's a couple of games in a row where I can really see this player benefiting or this set of players benefiting, I'm going to try to be a lot more brave and determined to attack that and not just half-heartedly pick one player from that team and maybe not even captain them. Like, I'm really going to back up my my instincts with action rather than just kind of covering my bases a little bit, which at times last season I think I did more often than not. Like, a free hit is an obvious and pretty good example of it, but this also relates to several game weeks in a row where, okay, Arsenal defense absolutely flying. Why am I not tripling up on them? Why am I not backing that? Because I was probably scared of losing the clean sheet and therefore not getting the maximum upside out of it. So I'm trying not to be so afraid of crashing and burning in the pursuit of something great this season. If I think Man City triple attack is the way to go, I'm not going to be scared off of that just because I think I'm overexposed. I'm going to go for it because that's what I truly believe is the right path. So yeah, that's the way I see it going down this season. I don't mind putting all my eggs in one basket if I truly believe it's the right basket.
Interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I do, long-term listeners will know compound differential is something I've spoken about an awful lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess that speaks to that. And I think that, I don't know, I think overall with a lot of these mistakes that we've sort of said that we'll avoid, a lot of it seems to come down to managing risk and trying to manage risk effectively. And sometimes, you know, there have been aspects that we should lean into a bit more, as with what we just discussed, and the discussion around not underestimating set piece takers, you know, just trying to have something controllable within that risk is also kind of quite important. And, you know, not dismissing review. I mean, that again mitigates some risk a little bit because it's like an objective kind of source to check things, I guess. I do think a lot of this, and I think that's what FPL can be a lot of the time, is about managing risk, isn't it? I think that can kind of, I guess, help us a little bit. I mean, I think there's definitely kind of cause for a very kind of cautious game. I mean, historically, the most cautious managers have done very well to pull back and just do nothing. I do wonder if this year, with the opportunity, which is the flip side of the heightened sort of impetus to just roll because you've got more transfers to roll, and therefore you can, next week you've got 3 free transfers to use, 4 free transfers to use. Taking those opportunities, I think, is going to be quite, for me at least, quite I'm going to be quite tempted every week. And I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised to see you as well if you are kind of going to commit to not be, I'm not going to say be cautious, but to go on the attack a bit more. I wouldn't be surprised to see you as well potentially kind of make a bit of hay with that, because it does sound like it's something that you're quite, I think, passionate about in the times that we've spoken about this.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and there are similar themes in quite a few of these points, but a lot of it comes down to backing my own gut instinct more often. And I think I'm going to try to listen to what I truly believe is going to happen and back that up with what my team actually looks like. Far too often I'm a bit like you said earlier on in the pod, just willing to kind of be swayed by what other people believe. And eventually, because I think they're all really intelligent, I'd start owning it as my own belief as well, when I also had my own input to provide that I've kind of just lost along the way. So I'm going to try really hard this season not to allow that to be the case. We are lucky because we pod on a Monday night. It will be before I watch or listen or consume all of that content, so I can come back to the pods and use that as a what was I thinking at the start of the week kind of thing. So that's my plan for this season, basically listen back and see if I've missed anything or forgotten what I was thinking.
God, listening to us for your
I know.
for your massively insightful FPL advice. I mean, that's a questionable thing.
Who'd do that?
I kid. I'm hopeful that we are vaguely useful to people. Yes, I think there are loads of things you can kind of. I'm sure there's loads of mistakes that all of you are thinking about that you potentially do, and hopefully we've kind of touched on them, given voice to one or two of them, but hopefully those are a good selection of things, pitfalls, flaws in how FL managers do manage every year, and things that we do tend to kind of do. But I think that all of that, as I said, just links into just making sure that you're always going to make mistakes. You're always going to get something wrong. Even the best managers do get stuff wrong every now and again. But hopefully all of those sort of little errors from in your game, which we're never going to completely iron out, but hopefully you'll think again, perhaps when the mood strikes, when you're hovering over that confirm transfer button, hopefully you'll remember this pod and just think, maybe not, I haven't quite got the news yet, or I'm not entirely sure that I fancy that actually, because it's not what I thought. All these little things hopefully help you going forward for the next season.
Absolutely. And I've really enjoyed today's show. Hopefully you have out there as well. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for listening. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL, or myself at FPL Pricey, also across on YouTube as well if you wanted to find me there. Instagram and Threads is WGTA.FPL. I'm FPL Pricey on there as well. If you did enjoy the pod, please, if you could follow us on those channels, that'd be amazing. If you could also give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to it, that would be equally amazing. And the final amazing thing you could do, if you're watching on YouTube, please do consider giving us a like and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content, of course. All of that really, really does go a long, long way.
It does indeed. Well, thanks, Sam. I hope you enjoyed the pod. We're back next week for our proper Game 1 preview with the return of Pick Your Fighter, where we look at A versus B, questions which are reflecting the community as we head towards that Game 1 deadline. Speak to you very, very soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?